you, Michael Twigg from the I am completely blanking on this. Sustain,
Smart
Smart
prosperity.
Prosperity Institute. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm going to restart that. Okay, 3,
no
2.
problem.
I'd like to thank Michael Twigg for coming on from the Smart Prosperity Institute to talk about his. Well, I was going over it just before we came on the air here. You're investing in the future of Ontario's Greenbelt work, which is I thought it was an interesting topic or an angle in terms of how to approach the Greenbelt going forward. And I've been wanting to have you on for a little while. Finally got around to making the ask. Rather than me explaining it to our listeners, why don't I ask you directly? Can you kind of summarize what this article is about and what made you want to look into this side of the Greenbelt?
Yeah, so first, just want to say thanks, Joel, for having me on. I think it's quite an important issue, and for me, having grown up in Ontario, the Greenbelt is close to my heart. So it's something that has always sort of been there since 2005. It's been with that protected status, and the main thrust of our work is to really try and attach this dollar value to the services that are provided by the ecosystems or the environment that are in that area. And when we talk about the different service values, we're really talking about things like flood protection, pollination for plants and trees, but even things like recreation. Something that we really found during the pandemic was that everyone rushed out to a park. Everyone rushed out to, a national park, a provincial park, a local park. And these are the types of things that the Greenbelt can offer. And when you think about mental and physical health, the value of that for people during the pandemic, but even continuing to today is it's quite high. It's in the billions of dollars every year, and it's something that we can't give up. We have to keep making sure that we're able to provide that. So it's social and physical health services for everyone in the region.
And what I found interesting about the work that you authored here is that you're taking those high concept ideas and you're assigning a monetary value to it. We'll provide a link to it in our show notes, people. And if you have the time, I really do recommend just skim through it if you have to, because there's some really interesting ideas in here. One, just for example, and it's something I gravitated towards. There's a couple things. One, you're talking about creating like investment products, because you did work with the Investment Bureau of Canada on this work, and you're talking about putting investment products so that people can literally invest their money into the Greenbelt in terms of using it as like basically a bulwark against climate change and the danger and the problems we're going to face down the road. And can you I'm kind of speaking for you again, but could you give us kind of like your thinking around that? Like how, this is kind of radical thinking in this day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe just one point of clarification. So it was the Insurance Bureau of Canada that we worked with. But I would say there's kind of a two-pronged strategy there. So from the financial investor side, a lot of interest. And, if we were to think about examples in the Canadian context, this isn't a new concept. It just hasn't been applied to this type of thinking yet. So if we think about municipal green bonds in the cities of Toronto and Ottawa, they are typically used for public transit infrastructure. Now, the more recent denomination in the Portland's redevelopment that was done to actually reduce the impact of flooding in that area and revitalize the waterfront in Toronto had a component of nature restoration that was attached to it. And what we're seeing is that there was more of an interest on the financial side to invest in these types of projects. Main reason being is that it reduces the risk to existing assets. So if you think about it from a financial perspective, it's a win-win situation because you're reinforcing things that people want. I mean, we've seen time and time again that there's quite an important connection to the Greenbelt. I mean, many polls have come out recently saying that this is one of the concerns that Ontarians have the most today. But when you attach that financial side to it, when you talk about billions of dollars worth of infrastructure, and that these types of projects can not only protect that infrastructure, but make it more resilient in the future, it's kind of a no-brainer from that perspective. And we've been working with major financial organizations to talk about what this looks like. And then on the second side, I would say, if you think about it from an insurance perspective, it does the exact same thing. If insurance companies have to pay out less and they can invest a little bit of money, whether it's through reduced premiums or through an active investment in the project, case by case study, it also, reduces the cost on their side and then provides benefits downstream. The main thing we're seeing is that when we think about green bonds, they're providing either at or above market rates for these types of returns. So, when you have a level of surety that's at the market rate, there's not really much of a challenge to make that mental leap from where we are to where we need to be to get the investors on board.
And there's another part of in the piece that you wrote. There's you're talking about the bonds that not just insurance companies or private equity firms or the private sector, but kind of the public could pool resources and purchase into physically. And you even mentioned things about local municipal governments. So you think of like hypothetically, the town of Newmarket could physically invest in like the Oak Ridges Moraine and the areas around their neck of the woods, same as Halton municipalities. I'm thinking like Milton and Georgetown, they can invest in the areas around them, physically invest. But I was thinking that there's nothing stopping, say, a not-for-profit, say, from pooling some resources, saying we'll buy a share of that bond, and now we actually have money physically invested, if you will, into the health and maintenance of the Greenbelt. And how do you? I guess I'm kind of flabbergasted because it seems so simple, but at the same time, I'm like, it's such a revolutionary idea to me of like, I actually invest in watersheds and the farmlands and whatnot. Just tell me your thinking around that. Like how, because I'll be honest, I read it and you blew my mind here, and that's why I'm kind of talking a million miles a second here.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, it's kind of funny because it's something we're hearing a lot, that it seems so simple, but how did it take us so long to get here? And what we've been finding is it really is the challenge of getting people from different sectors talking the same language. So getting people on the development side, getting people on the environmental side, getting financial institutions, insurance organizations, the legal side, really to kind of get to a point where they understand that from moving point A to point B, so investment to conservation, and then point C as the return, that's where the main challenge lies, the structure of what that investment can look like. And I can say, there are other jurisdictions in the world. We can look to our neighbors to the south. They have successful models that are run on these same principles. Their recreation models are very, very successful in terms of an investment to outcome and a repayment schedule. It's really that we happen to be a little bit slower moving and applying it to the nature context, I would say, on the Canadian side. But it's also public will and public opinion. I think, I don't want to say we've taken the Greenbelt for granted, but I think we've been very lucky to have it and to have it be a government-sponsored initiative. And now that it is, there's challenges being applied to it that, we need to address, that I think it's making the opinion around that kind of be a little bit more realized that something different has to change. And, I don't want to put the onus on climate change too much, but it's one of the silver linings, if you can say that, is that a lot of different sectors are realizing that they are exposed, there's a risk there, and that this is one of the ways they can mitigate that risk and reduce their costs over the long term.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch upon that, the kind of perception of this, because I think, if you read the media now, the general idea is that the Greenbelt, eventually we're going to have to develop on it. Like we're in a housing crunch in the province, and we just, what, here the fact is we're just going to have to build onto the Greenbelt to meet the housing demand. And this way of reframing that argument of, this isn't land to be developed, this is land to be conserved, because the long term, the long-term return on investment is going to be so much greater than the short term, building a neighborhood and flipping a profit on some housing. What has been the response to that concept? Not just I think the public will be on board. But in terms of the private sector, what has the response been to that kind of shift in thinking?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And, I can say again, from our perspective, it really comes down to, as you mentioned, return on investment over the long horizon. If we're looking at areas kind of as a blank slate to develop, we're not taking into consideration what they're already providing in terms of a cost return for communities in that area. If we think about something as simple as water quality, every municipality in the province spends money on water treatment and water quality assurances. And a lot of these systems provide natural filtration. So if you just take that one example, the development from that perspective, if it's not done in a way that respects natural water flows and sediment control, those expenditures, those costs are going to rise, which means your return on investment over the long term, if you take into consideration all these different factors, will be substantially lower than if you take them into consideration from the outset. So, the response from the private sector, as soon as you start talking about bigger returns, is usually pretty positive. And we're hearing the same thing. On the insurance side, those are kind of our two major players in this space at the moment. And on the insurance side, we're talking billions of dollars a year spent on remediation from natural disasters. We had the Direco, I think it was in 2020, that caused substantial damage in Southern Ontario. And, would more conservation in the Greenbelt have prevented these types of activities? Likely not, but it would have made them more resilient. You're talking about reduced flooding. So that's less damage to homes, less damage to businesses, less damage to infrastructure. And these are all things where the money can be better spent elsewhere. So, if we're constantly trying to play catch up to fix things that are breaking as a result of being more exposed and more vulnerable, we end up kind of depressing or reducing the growth that we can experience in this region as a result of its, kind of like natural dynamic attitude and atmosphere. So, if we want to have the region grow and realize its potential, realize its development potential, taking these things into consideration from the outset is starting to resonate a lot more with the private sector enterprise.
And I wonder, that I find it interesting from the insurance point of view, because I live in Burlington. There's a big story a few years ago about we had flooding where in a part of the city that just did not flood, and a lot of it was just that's the effects of climate change. Is that just where the systems the natural systems that we had in place just can't keep up with climate change. And there's I could see, like, there were people like, I don't have flood insurance because I never needed it. I never lived in a place that was kind of like, why would I spend money on that? Now, it's hard to find flood insurance because now you're like, well, now you're prone to flooding. And I guess we're starting to see, like, kind of that mixture of private enterprise saying, no, the climate change is real. The costs are there's a very real bottom line to this for not addressing this. And I'm wondering, like, are you seeing a big, I might be putting words in your mouth, but are you seeing, a bit of pressure from these industries to say, like, the clock is ticking. We can't, this isn't like a nice to do down the road. This is something that, we kind of need to find a solution to this now so that we can calculate the costs and fix it into our business models going forward. Like, I'm getting a greater and greater sense that, we're all kind of seeing that this is an urgent situation that needs to be fixed or addressed now with tools that we have presently available. What are your thoughts on that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We're already hearing about if we take the kind of general financial picture of rising inflation at the moment, about the supposed market correction that's assumed to happen probably sometime in 2023. We're hearing already the financial sector is building that into the current market rates that they're providing for any type of credit or loan aspect. And it's no different when we think about the development angle. If we look at where investments are being channeled, they're being channeled to more conservation oriented or low impact development. Low impact development is sort of the new I would say, way forward around how this is being mainstreamed into sort of development, conservation, joint effort in this respect. And yes, it's a now or never type attitude. You know, we're hearing from our financial partners, we're hearing from the insurance sector that, you know, we're at the point where action is necessary. Action on the ground is necessary. More projects are necessary to get this started. And I would say we've done pretty well in kind of a case by case or project by project basis in the Ontario context, but there does seem to be sort of more of a cohesive effort for you know, the Greenbelt and the surrounding regions as well. You know, take a look at it more of an ecosystem based approach to make sure that we're not fragmenting these resources essentially, and you know, siloing them off so they're not as productive as they possibly could be for the region itself. And that argument, I think, is one of the ones that resonates the most. If you talk about connections, if you think about it in the sort of traditional market supply chains, that resonates a lot with the private sector. And yeah, there definitely there is an urgency, and I think that urgency is getting to be greater and greater as the days kind of tick by, and there's no action on the ground yet.
You just mentioned, you know, the market supply chain, which is, you know, the trigger word in economics these days of and post COVID, the supply chain. And there's another aspect in this that I don't think gets enough play in the media about the green belt, but you do mention it, and I want to give a chance to highlight that. And that is the fact that a big chunk of the green belt is agricultural land. And I think when some people think of agricultural land, they're thinking of the family farm, right? You know, there's you know, mom and pa get up at the crack of dawn to feed the chickens and milk the cows and plow the land. And in reality, the agricultural industry is, I don't think it's the largest industry, but it has got to be like second or third largest industry in Ontario. Food, you know, from farming to food processing and whatnot. You know, the I'm looking at a map right now. We have like down in Niagara region, the wine industry, which is a huge component, not just to tourism, but just exports and whatnot. And you're getting into things like craft beer and whiskey and distillery and all that. Like it's, I'm just going the tip of the iceberg. You know, what is the danger of us neglecting actual, like, preserving the green belt and finding a way to make it sustainable? Are we going to shoot the, not just our, you know, the ecological side, but like our economic foot? You know, like this is a major industry in Ontario that if we just say, hey, you know, good luck to you, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot when the bill comes due.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what's at risk? About $4 billion a year in terms of agricultural production just in the Greenbelt alone. That's, you know, that's what we're really talking about. And that doesn't really take into consideration the rapidly growing agri-food sector. I mean, that sector is growing by leaps and bounds every year. You know, they're adding billions of dollars worth of value to what they're able to produce based on products that are you know, commodities that are being grown in the Greenbelt region. And its prime location is, you know, that's one of the things that drives the value. It's located next to, you know, the largest metropolis in the Canadian context, but then also many different cities in the southern states. You know, a lot of our agricultural production in Canada is actually exported outside of our borders. So if we're talking about an economic value, yeah, you know, diminishing this key producing area is it, you know, to make the justification from an economic perspective that reducing agricultural lands for another purpose doesn't really take into consideration the fact that this land is highly productive today, and it's going to be highly productive in the future. Because, you know, when we talk about agricultural land, just the quality of the land, it has, you know, Southern Ontario has more than half of the best agricultural land in Canada. You know, that's, you know, if we think about it from a national perspective, Southern Ontario is not very big in terms of the wider Canadian geography, but yeah, half of the agricultural land. So if we, you know, kind of remove the fuel from the engine of the agricultural sector in that space, we're you know, there's a risk. There's a risk of having an industry suffer and lose money. So yeah, I would say that, if we don't take that into consideration as well, the productivity of this land, but also, from the perspective of what we're talking about, environmental conservation is really the willingness of producers in the region to be on board with more environmentally friendly practices. That's something we're definitely seeing in and around the Greenbelt. There's been some great work done by the Greenbelt Foundation and the Friends of the Greenbelt to work with agricultural producers to engage in, soil health, soil fertility, reduce soil erosion, reduce pollutants that run into our waterways. So, we're not even only just at risk of losing that economic production, we're at risk of losing a sector that is on board with conserving the Greenbelt and the economic production. It's kind of a dual-edged sword here that doesn't cut a good way either way it goes.
So on that note, what's been the response from since you put this out? What have you been hearing from not just the private sector, but also municipal and the provincial, and let's even go to the top federal governments on the ideas that you're putting forward here?
Yeah, I would say, the reception's been pretty good. I would say the biggest challenge we've faced thus far with, the three you mentioned is that municipal governments in Ontario are, I would say, a little bit overburdened at the moment in terms of trying to scramble to figure out exactly where the new powers lie that they're able to kind of harness. But, I'm of the mind, we did have a couple of discussions with folks from in and around the Hamilton and Niagara region, and they were very interested and eager to learn more about the opportunities, because they do see one of the benefits of having sort of the keys to the kingdom is that they can engage in this type of work. At the provincial level, they're always looking for more ways to basically reduce the cost on government, but also help in reinforce enterprise on the ground. And this is one of the ways to do it. This gets multiple sectors that are often competing. We think about, private enterprise and nature conservation, and then public works or, public infrastructure are usually at odds when we think about the development context. But this is one way where it doesn't have to be. It just requires a more careful consideration up front. And it can really design a, project or even regional development or growth plan that favors environmental conservation for the sake of providing greater returns down the road. And it makes the public lift a little bit lighter in the provincial context. And then on the federal side, this fits exactly with what the federal government is looking to do with their 25 by 25 and 30 by 30 targets. It really kind of, it falls in line with that strategic objective. And I think it comes down again to how can we make the programs that we're looking to do less dependent on funding that's either grant funded or philanthropic funded, and really get the private sector in there to kind of reinforce any type of variability that you would think about in terms of investment streams in these types of projects. Really a response to the COVID pandemic in that respect is that there was a shock to all different types of investment streams as a result of the pandemic, and it really opened the eyes to a lot of players in the game that we do need more of a diverse investment portfolio or a diverse set of investors in these types of projects, because it will help again to lighten the public lift on this. But it's crucially important. I mean, we've had preliminary discussions with Infrastructure Canada, and they're on board as a result of saying that this is crucial for the health of Canadian infrastructure long term. So we're not even thinking just in a local context. It's very much like a national priority and objective.
And that's absolutely. I can see. Yeah, the need to just. I'm looking at a map of the Greenbelt right now. You can see all the waterways and the watersheds that feed in and out of it, and that go pretty much right through Toronto and Hamilton and Oshawa. You can see how it's so vital. What gets me about this report is how comprehensive it is. I mean, we've been talking about the side of the insurance side, mitigation of risk due to climate change, the agriculture to the industry. And the last part that I thought was interesting was how you can tie it into people's direct lives through tourism and recreational use. I mean, the one thing you mentioned at the start was how people are getting out and saying, let's just walk the trails in our own backyard pretty much. And there's a kind of a greater appreciation for the nature around us. And that's something that I always thought was interesting, is that encouragement of tourism up there, once you get people kind of actually involved, going out to these places. We don't have to talk about provincial parks or what per se, but we're talking like resorts, conservation areas, campgrounds, and those private entities. Not really a question. There's more just a statement of fact than anything. But it's a way of just it's what I thought was unique about this approach was that it is kind of like you have social, economic, and environmental factors kind of all merging together to really reapproach our view of the Greenbelt.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly kind of what we're trying to hit on the head. I mean, if you look at the values in the report around what provides the most sort of economic benefit, it's recreation and tourism. And I would say even that number is likely a little bit on the lower end, or more of a conservative estimate, because it takes into consideration sort of direct consumption. It doesn't take into consideration the businesses that might be attached to that, or the businesses that may have supplied some type of either transportation or resources that would be, say, you purchase equipment in Toronto to then go camping in the Greenbelt. It doesn't take into consideration that linkage between those two elements as well. And it really comes down to the fact that we can't really think about these elements in isolation anymore. It's all connected, and we're finding it, through our media, through our social interactions, through our daily lives, that, we are connected to the things around us. We are connected to those around us. And I think this approach really puts that at the center. It mainstreams that idea that, there's a social connection to where we choose to go. There's an economic connection. There's a physical connection. And that really is a driving factor. And if we look, if we can develop a way to think about those connections, and it might come from a project by project basis, but if we can sort of see where those flows go and where those connections are, I think we'll definitely see the number in terms of the value of the Greenbelt for those purposes grow exponentially. And to say this again too, this doesn't even take into consideration the physical or mental health benefits, which are high. We saw that during the pandemic. They were high, and they will still be high. And I think it's something that folks are now just starting to become more aware of on their day-to-day life. Is getting outside is important. Having a park close by is important. And if you don't have a park close by, having some type of accessible connection to a green space or a natural space is key for your daily life.
You know what? I can't think of a better way just to end off the episode on that's a cheery note, which is a something we all need these days. So thank you very much, Michael, for coming on. I look forward to future work from you on this front, and see where hopefully this idea takes root and we start seeing more investment in the Greenbelt, because it's just an intriguing way of just viewing this important piece of land in the country. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing your work with us.
It was a pleasure.